So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, which is part of our webinar series funded by the Australian Government Department of Health, Disability and Ageing. And if you've joined us before, welcome back. You'll know that what these webinars and series are all about are how to apply evidence into practice, which is part of our comorbidity project. My name is Christina Morell. I'm an Associate Professor and Deputy Director of Treatment and Translation Research at the Matilda Centre for Research in Mental Health and Substance Use here at the University of Sydney, where I also lead the Comorbidity Project. And I'm so pleased to be here today, joined by other members of my team as we bring you part 2 of 2 in this special series, which is focused on domestic and family violence. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners of country on which we are meeting today and recognise that we are joining from many different lands. I'm joining from beautiful Gadigal lands today, and I'd like to recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and skies, and acknowledge the same for the lands that you're all joining from. Pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, as well as any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. I'd also like to recognise and acknowledge the many people with lived and living experience of mental health conditions and substance use, as well as their families, carers, loved ones, and chosen families, many of whom have been involved in our project and the development of so many of our resources over so many years. Rodney is going to be pausing a few times during today's webinar to take some questions, so feel free to post any questions that you have in our Q&A along the way today. If you have any comments or need help with your Zoom or any other comments, please post these in the chat and a member of our team will jump in. And the recording and handouts from today will be available from our website in the next few days or early next week. As I mentioned, today is part 2 in our 2-part special series focusing on domestic and family violence. If you weren't able to join us a few weeks ago for part 1, I hope you've been able to catch up on that recording or will be able to later, as we recommend that you watch this as a full series. That session focused on navigating the intersection of domestic and family violence and alcohol and other drug services, practice considerations for staff. Part 2 today will be considering how to engage adult users of domestic and family violence, concepts, roles, and practice tips. Both of these webinars are at 90 minutes instead of our usual 1 hour, which we're hoping will give us just that little bit more additional time. So if you're having to duck out early, you can catch up on the recordings, which will be posted on our website. For those of you who are practitioners, Sophie and Rodney will be holding a follow-up panel discussion in our online community of practice in September. You can find out more information about that at our website. If you have a few minutes at the end of the session today, please share any feedback about this series. We do read everything that you sent through, so thank you for taking the time to do that. And now it's my very great pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Rodney Vlais. Rodney is a behavioural change specialist, training provider, supervisor, evaluator, and psychologist with experience as a men's behaviour change practitioner in policy and capability building work. Sorry, Rodney. Thank you again to our friends and collaborators who have helped us behind the scenes bringing this series to life. It's been very rewarding for us to get to this point, and I'm so pleased to be able to have Rodney here with us. So thank you again, Rodney, so much, and I'll hand over to you to get started when you're ready.
Thank you, Christina, and also to Hayley, Sally, Alex, and Catherine, because of course, while I'm the front end of this webinar, the work that you've all done to make this possible, of course, is at least 50% of why we're here today. So thank you. I'm on Wurundjeri land here in Naarm, colonially known as Melbourne. Was born on Wadjuk land in the southwest of Western Australia. And I acknowledge the land that I'm on, where the Wurundjeri people are not only the traditional owners of the land, but in many ways the sovereign owners. But of course, they're not recognised as such. And so for people like myself, non-Indigenous, part of a colonial background, we need to recognise that we are occupying First Nations lands, and to unoccupy that means both some giving up of entitlements and rights and things that we assume are ours, and to enter into a more of a community, more of a connection, more of an interbeing, and to learn from First Nations ways of understanding land and country and spirit and water and sacredness. And there's both a richness in that giving up, a richness for all of us, and an ability for people like myself to reflect on my own white lens and learn about the particular ways I see the world for good and for bad in a true spirit of partnership. And that does involve some changes in power dynamics and ways in which First Nations people, like the Wurundjeri people here, can actually reclaim sovereignty and care for land and community and spirit. And in that, I pay my heartfelt gratitude to all Wurundjeri warriors, ancestors, past, present, and in the future, and for all of those and all of the lands that we're all inhabiting and occupying together as part of this webinar. Today, I will be focusing on some concepts to help us to understand the intersects between substance use, mental health, and men's use of domestic family and sexual violence. I'll be focusing on men because it's mostly men who are causing harm. And that is my expertise is in engaging men. And I know for many of us working in AOD and mental health services, you're seeing a reasonably high proportion of clients, of male clients, who are using violence. And it can be difficult and challenging to work out how do we step in and respond? What's our roles? What can we try to do safely? How do we keep women and children and others who are experiencing the men's violence in our minds as we try to courageously and sensitively step in? Given that for most of you, you're not behaviour change practitioners and you're not there to do the long-term change, accountability, healing and transformational work with the men. So we'll be focusing on what your role might be in that courage of stepping in. I'll be introducing you to some skills and some practice concepts, but it'll be just the barest of introductions. And in many ways, my role today is to signpost. I'll be letting you know of a range of different resources, some of which I've written and where you can find them, that you can take deeper dives after this webinar. And hopefully today, I will be letting you know of some of the skill areas, the skill considerations, and things that can help yourselves and your colleagues to feel a bit more confident, to have those courageous conversations with clients who are causing harm, and to listen out to risk as you go along in that way. And hopefully this will equip you with some further points in your own journey to add this complexity to your work. I think many of you already have a lot of the foundational skills in safely and effectively engaging those clients who are using domestic family and sexual violence. You're used to dealing with complexity. You're used to dealing with dual diagnosis. You're used to thinking about health issues, suicide, a range of different things that are connected to your core work on mental health and AOD. When we're adding in men's use of domestic family and sexual violence, yes, that is a nuanced complexity and it's not easy and we don't want to cause harm. But there are real ways that we can bridge from work in AOD and mental health towards a focus on domestic family and sexual violence. We can bring that into our work in ways that make sense to us and that make sense to our clients as well. It's not taking a leap into something completely different. And if there's one message I'd love to leave us all with today, it's that if we are working with an adult, with a man, through AOD or mental health, and we know or we suspect that he's using domestic family and sexual violence, and we completely ignore that in our work, we're not working in our client's best interests. We're not only potentially missing an opportunity to try to enhance safety for those who are experiencing his violence, we also might be sabotaging our own mental health and AOD work if we completely ignore his violent and controlling behaviour. That ignoring can undermine our core business as well. So let's get started. I will start focusing just on some key concepts, some intersects between AOD, mental health, and men's use of domestic family and sexual violence. I'll dive a little bit into some of the detail around that with substance use and mental health. Then we'll pause for some questions, and then I'll go into some engagement skills, just signposting them rather than training you into those skills, because that's not possible in a 90-minute webinar. As Christina emphasised, please use the Q&A function to put in questions as we go along, and we'll do our best to address as many as we can when we pause for questions. So I'll now share and start working through some slides. I'll just preempt this by saying that some of the slides have a lot of text. Some don't, they're just pictures. And this is deliberate because this will be recorded and you'll have an opportunity to look at the slides later. So I will be flying through a lot of things in these 90 minutes, and it will seem overwhelming. And there'll be points at which I will probably just stop talking and allow you to absorb a little bit of detailed information on the slide and then move on. There'll be too much to absorb today. But if you come back to the recording, you can pause the recording at various points. You can go through the slides more slowly in the future to come back and fill in the gaps of things that you're not going to be able to pick up because we're going to be going at such a fast pace today. So let's strap ourselves into the seat and here we go. Okay. So, okay. So to begin with, we are here, well, I am here, and I'm sure so many of us are here because we want to support victim survivors. We don't want to bury our head in the sands when we see opportunities to engage those who are causing harm because we want to help open up space for action for those who are experiencing violence. As of course, victim survivors have very narrow lanes to try to live their lives. A man's cursor controlling behaviour means that everything is a negotiation for her, an exhausting negotiation within herself. Do I risk trying to see my mum because he's suspicious of my mum and he's using social violence against me to prevent that? Do I have to go underground so he doesn't know what I'm doing? How do I explain it to him? Is it just all too hard? Everything is an exhausting negotiation when his cursor controlling tactics really narrow those abilities for her and the children to lead dignified lives. Everything becomes hard, exhausting, and of course, his use of terror and fear raises those emotional costs for her and the children to lead normal lives. And we also know that women and children are trying the best they can to open up spaces for themselves despite his use of violence. They are resisting and trying to strive for dignity. And so while I'm going to be focusing on the men today, what are our opportunities to have courageous conversations around their harm, we're always keeping women and children in mind here. These are really very useful graphics and images from Inside Exchange. Some of you might know this particular website, and a wonderful video, which I won't show now, called Our Actions, which helps to set the scene for why we might be trying to engage with users of violence. We want to close the gaps that they're using to be able to cause harm. Obviously, we're trying to support survivors genuinely, taking their lead, listening to what they need to be able to build safety, acting in solidarity and partnering with women and children as they attempt to open up some space for their lives despite his use of violence. With him, we're trying to create opportunities, pathways, journeys towards change, even if our role is only to plant some seeds. We are not overly challenging him or confronting him or moralizing him, and we'll talk a bit about that later, because of course, if we are too strong, too tough, too confrontative in how we engage a client on his use of violence, he will dig in, become defensive, will lose rapport, and he might just strengthen his violence supporting narratives because he'll feel attacked. So it's not about confronting. However, we don't want to collude with his beliefs and attitudes that he uses to justify his behaviour, and we want to try to close those opportunities that he has to cause harm. Now, as we do this, and as we think about engaging men who cause harm, we're obviously aware of shame, and shame is something that I imagine as AOD and mental health practitioners, you're working with and dealing with all the time. There's so much shame around some behaviours that's associated with substance use and with mental health struggles. And it's similar in a way with men who use violence. There are multiple sources of shame. And because of these multiple sources of shame, it's really difficult for many men to get to an uncomfortable point to sit with the discomfort of going, my behaviour is not who I am. The harm that I'm causing, the violence that I'm using is not in line with who I want to be in this world and how I see myself as a man, as a father, as a parent, as a community member, as a good bloke, whatever. To change inevitably involves some confrontation to an extent, some self-confrontation. We don't want ourselves to moralise and be the big heavy dude that comes in and confronts our clients. We want to create safe conditions for our clients to be able to gently confront themselves. And that confrontation is, of course, when there are aspects of character that they define themselves, important aspects of identity, values that are critical for them, and there could be individual or community values. It happens when their behaviour is obviously not consistent. And of course, you know this through motivational interviewing. You know this is already through your substance use work and inviting clients to understand how their substance using lifestyle is not really who they are. And there's a part of themselves that wants to let go of that lifestyle. And they want to let go of that lifestyle for a reason. There's an identity there, there's values, there's hopes, there's aspirations as to why they want to move away from a substance using lifestyle. And it's similar with men's use of AOD, with men's use of domestic and family violence, sorry. But there are multiple layers of shame here, and that can relate to their past experiences, to the trauma they might have experienced as children. It could relate to being part of a marginalised community that's hated against. It could be related to a loss of hope that they can change. So when we're inviting men to sit in a space of discomfort, to see how their behaviour is not consistent with who they want to be and is not consistent with what they want for themselves, their families, their children, and the world, it's going to create some necessary discomfort. And this is hard for men to sit in. And of course, there's a gendered aspect of this. How we respond to traumatic experiences, how we respond to that shame is gendered. Men in a patriarchal world can get away with blaming their current partner or their former partner for making him feel bad rather than understanding the true source of that discombobulation being the trauma they might have experienced. It's much easier for them to believe that their partner's done something wrong, and that she is cheating on him or that she's wronging him. And the gender comes in because of men's sense of entitlement and setting rules for their partner, setting rules for her not to upset him or not to disturb him or not to make him feel less of a man, not to make him feel jealous, when of course that's his responsibility. She's not doing things to make him feel that. But in a patriarchal world, men can get away with blaming women for that and setting rules for women to not to upset him or not to make him feel bad, not to make him feel jealous or angry or discombobulated. And those rules leave her and the children with such little space for action. So gender and trauma combine in quite complex ways when we're working with men who cause harm. And that entitlement helps to produce a victim stance. And one of the ways in which men continue to cause harm is they convince themselves that their behaviour is okay. Now, of course, they don't go around thinking to themselves, I'm a wife basher and that is okay. Sure. But they may think, oh, I can't trust her. She's going up and talking to other men and I told her not to because she's just going to be hit on by other men and she doesn't understand how men can win her over. She's so green and young. I've got to make sure, I've got to monitor her and make sure she doesn't go off and cheat on me, etc., etc. The victim stance that she is harming him, that by going off and talking to other men, that's somehow wronging him or making him feel bad or jealous. And so he feels that he's the one who's been hard done by. And therefore he gives himself the green light to use violent and controlling behaviour to shut down her behaviour that he thinks is unfair. We call this the victim stance. how a user of violence paradoxically, despite the fact that they're causing a lot of harm and engaging in a range of controlling behaviours to shut down the other person's behaviour, they see themselves as being wronged. And they see themselves as being wronged because they have unfair, entitlement-based rules about the other person's behaviour. That is not other-centred. It's just about making sure that they feel good at any cost, even if the cost is to another person's safety or well-being or cost to their children. So men fill themselves up with these victim stance thoughts, and they thought stack these thoughts, particularly as they're building up towards using violence. And they often don't realise that they're thought stacking in these ways because for the men it just happens so quickly. They perceive her doing something to wrong him through his entitlement-based lens, and he experiences a really intense emotion. And in his view, he just believes he just lost it at her. Whereas really, he's escalating that emotion up through a whole lot of victim stance thinking. And so that's where the righteous anger comes from, often comes from an entitled space, and it can certainly be fed by trauma for some men. But he doesn't realize he's making a choice. He doesn't realize that he's stacking on those victim stance thoughts and working himself up more and more and more. Now, just really briefly, your clients who are using violence, they can be using power and controlling tactics for a range of different reasons. Some men are really vulnerable and they rely entirely on a relationship for their own psychological well-being. And so as controlling her in order to try to stay in that relationship because they could not cope or survive if she'd made an autonomous decision to leave him. Others are much higher in entitlement and may not even be interested in an intimate relationship, but to be honest, are really intent on using controlling tactics to exploit and extract benefits from her. Other users of violence have a long history of using violence in a range of different situations, not only against intimate partners, and may have a sense of, to survive, I need to know that no one can mess with me. So I need to strike first, act tough, and make sure that people don't get the better of me. They may have a history of using violence in a range of circumstances, and they bring that in. In shifting this behaviour, it can take a long journey. There's a real investment in the curse of control that the men use. They're reinforced for it in our patriarchal world. It serves a psychological function of helping them to protect themselves from shame. And they may have learned through a range of different things throughout their life about how controlling women helps them to feel okay as a man and helps them to feel more of a man. And that is sometimes a lifelong quest for some men, particularly those who have had traumatic backgrounds and for those who have faced really marginalised circumstances, feeling really uncomfortable in their masculinity and will do anything to make themselves feel better as a man. And that might involve controlling women, feeling superior to women, always needing to win arguments against women, not being able to sit in a space of grey and negotiate things with women, but when their partner tries to express a different opinion, he sees that as a battle and therefore feels as though he has to win that battle rather than being a space of grey. And of course, we're always thinking about children here as well too. One of the reasons that we want to step in is because it's not only his partner, it's not only adult victim survivors who are experiencing harm. Of course, children are as well too. And many men's use of violence really harm the bonds between their partner and their children. So violence is a choice. Many of the men don't see it as a choice. One of our tasks is in courageously stepping in and opening up a space to talk with a man about some of the harm that he is causing, is help him to understand that there are different choices he can make even when he is incredibly emotionally vulnerable, having incredibly intense feelings, that this tensity of those feelings doesn't inevitably need to bubble over into using violent and controlling behaviour. Now, we know that choice is harder for some men than others. Again, I'm flying through things here as I talked about earlier. Many of the men that you work with have such difficult backgrounds, belong to minoritized communities, have had all of the discrimination that comes with struggling with AOD and mental health issues for years. And we feel compassion for those men, for those adults. The choice to use non-violence may well be harder for some of those men because of all that they're up against. Doesn't mean that's not a choice. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't expect them to make that choice to be non-violent, but we realize that some men, because of the circumstances of their lives and everything else that's going on for them, that choice is more difficult. And now there are others who have privileged levers, who use violence who have corporate positions, who belong to police, who have all sorts of, or maybe have standing in their cultural community, a range of different ways that they can use those levers to control family members. And there's other complexities to choice, which I won't go into now, but later on I'll tell you a resource where you can unpack some of these things in more detail. One of the things here in being sensitive and compassionate with men who cause harm is some men do feel a need to control their environment. For myself, I don't identify as male and haven't for quite a while. I'm non-binary, femme queer. However, I was socialised male as birth. And I can't just pretend I don't have that male entitlement skin to me. I can't just, because I changed my identity, believe I no longer have male privilege. I'm still battling with that. I'm also autistic. Uh, so I do like to control my environment a bit, being an autist. I need to be really careful that I don't control it to such an extent that it becomes controlling. Uh, and some of your clients who are struggling through AOD issues, for example, are also controlling their environment. They have to control their environment in order to feed that particular habit. Some of that control is often going to be controlling when he's using domestic and family violence. And so the substance use and the mental health issues combine with his controlling behaviours to make things really difficult for his family members. And now I'm going to focus on how some of this interplay happens, because before we start to think of some of the skills of engaging our clients around the use of domestic, family, and sexual violence, understanding the interplay between maybe their need to control their environment because of their mental health or AOD issues, and how that ends up as cursor control is really important here. And again, it comes back to entitlement. I'll start off focusing on AOD first quickly, then I'll go to mental health, and then we'll pause for some questions. So we're now going to enter a number of slides where there is so much detail that you won't be able to absorb it all, but you'll be able to come back to it. And I just wanted to provide some detail here for you so that it wasn't just a few headings. Men's substance use is intricately connected to their violent and controlling behaviour. There's some key questions here as part of that intersect that you'll see here on the screen. The interplay can be quite nuanced here in how his substance use is implicated in his domestic and family violence. The mere fact of this is a stereotypical scenario, but a man coming home after work, going to the fridge and cracking open a can, that instills fear. And it can be deliberately done to instill fear. And it can be done in a way where he's telling his partner, don't dare you say anything about my drinking. He's almost challenging her. He's almost baiting her to take a stand against his drinking, which she wants to do because she knows that if he drinks, he'll be less safe that night. Not that the alcohol is causing his violent and controlling behaviour, but it's an accelerant. If he struggles with possessive jealousy, substance use can narrow your thinking. We miss cues. We are less able when we're substance impacted. Well, it depends on the substance, of course. But with alcohol and a few other substances, we're less able to think laterally, widely, pick up cues on other people's faces, less likely to entertain a thought that might interrupt a particular pattern of thinking. So he is locked on when he's drinking, locked on to his jealous thoughts that she's having an affair, etc., etc. And being locked onto that, he's more likely to work himself up. And he might also, when he starts using violence, make decisions to go a bit further. Those sorts of restraints that he might have when he's sober might not be there to the same degree when he's drunk. She knows this. She wants to challenge him. She wants to create safety for herself and her kids, but he is daring her to stand up for him because he wants to create a situation where he gives himself permission to use violence because, again, he's in victim stance. How dare you stop me having a drink after I've come home after a hard day at work? He manufactures a situation where he feels that he's being wronged by her. And of course, as you know so much better than me, it's not just about intoxication, it's his whole lifestyle. What controlling behaviours does he need to engage in so that he can procure the substance? If she's a substance user as well, is he controlling her supply? Is he making her engaged in unwanted sex work in order to feed his habits? Is he forcing her to ring up work the next day to cover for him when he's too hungover or too substance impacted to go into work, etc., etc.? Many victim survivors talk about his withdrawal from the substance as one of the most dangerous periods for themselves. So it's not just intoxication, there's a range of different aspects of his lifestyle that can really impact on victim survivor safety. And a couple of slides here, which I won't speak to, which provide some more detail around some of the ways in which a man's AOD lifestyle can feed into, intensify, and be intricately connected with his violent and controlling behaviour that reduces her space for action, that creates fear, and is designed to really control her, using his male entitlement to control her and the family and the children so that he can keep his habit going. And again, it's a continuum. Even for those adults who aren't using domestic and family violence, of course, they're exerting a degree of manipulation. They're exerting a degree of pressure for their family members to cover up for him. They might be using some tactics to control family finances, to continue the habit. As you know so much better than me, that's often the case. But for the many use violent controlling behaviours, they take that to the extreme and it creates fear and terror. They use fear and terror as tactics to be able to maintain their control and their habit. Okay, we'll now just focus on mental health for a little bit, and then we will take some questions, and then we'll get to some engagement practices and skills, again, just signposting them. So for men who use violence, mental health issues are really important. Again, like AOD, it's not like depression, OCD, etc., etc. It's not like they cause a man to use domestic, family, and sexual violence. There are so many men and adults, women who struggle with mental health issues, who don't use terror and fear to try to control family members' behaviours. So it's not a cause, but again, it can be an accelerant. And again, it can reduce a man's capacity, an adult's capacity to be able to go on a change journey, and it can increase risk. And there are a number of ways it can do this. Obviously, if someone's really depressed, he's using violence, then he may not have much hope that he can become that non-violent person. He may not have much hope that the part of him that aspires for something different, the part of him that recognises that his harmful behaviour isn't who he is and isn't who he wants to be, he may have no hope that he can become that non-violent man. Hopelessness is obviously, a dangerous emotion for someone to experience when they're using domestic and family violence, particularly if they have a sense of grievance against their partner or former partner, which I'll focus on a bit later. Anxiety. If we look at jealousy, anxious, agitated, ruminative worry. A man who's using domestic, family, and sexual violence struggles with anxiety and has strong feelings of possessive or obsessive jealousy. He's often trying to make 100% sure that their partner's not cheating on him. And as you know, with anxiety, that fruitless search to make 100% sure that the thing that somebody's really anxious about is not going to happen just continues to feed the anxiety because it's impossible to get 100% assurance. But the lengths that he will go to monitor her, stalk her, use terror and fear, the emotional violence he will use to try to make her unattractive, calling her names, criticizing her for what she's wearing, deliberately trying to bring her sense of self-worth down so that he believes she's not going to be seen as sexually attractive in the eyes of other men. Yet, of course, she's got to be sexually attracted towards him. The tactics that he will go to try to make 100% sure that she's not cheating on him and just completely ignore the impacts on her and the psychological damage and how it's harming the relationship and what the impacts of that fear is. His anxiety is not causing him. There are many, anxious men who are not going to go to those lengths to not feel jealous. But some will choose to do so, and strong anxiety can make that worse. There are a number of other ways in which mental health issues can also impact it. And I guess one of the things here is that as mental health practitioners or as AOD practitioners, we can build safety by focusing on his mental health and AOD needs. That doesn't mean he's going to become a safe man. It doesn't mean he's going to stop his violent and controlling behaviour, but it can help. It can be a first step. It can be a way of working on AOD and mental health issues and then bridging towards other behaviours, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And of course, some men might use their mental health situation as an excuse as well too for their violent and controlling behaviours, to turn the attention onto him, the poor me, and deliberately try to manipulate her and manipulate in a patriarchal world the sense that women need to care for men and women need to give up and put themselves second for men. And of course, for some of these men, there's still a big part of them that's a 3-year-old or a 13-year-old. That's been traumatized, not healing. They're not working on healing that sense of internal trauma. So there's still a very big traumatized 3 or 13-year-old that's expecting their partner to mother him. But of course, they're also using their adult part smarts to control her and to entrap her into being that mother. And if she does something that isn't that mother, and of course, a romantic partner can't be a mother. She's got her own life and independence. She can't put her world second for him. She can't make her children second so that she can mother him as first. So again, there's those entitlement-based expectations and rules that he has. It's completely unfair. And when she doesn't put the children second and put him first, then he feels that victim stance. He feels that she has wronged him, and that gives him an excuse in his own mind to extend his violent behaviour. And so part of this for us as mental health practitioners, which is a bit more of my background as well as being a behaviour change specialist, our background is as a psychologist working in some mental health settings quite a while ago, is identity loss. Many men who use violence, not all, but many will come to a point of experiencing an attack on their identity. It might be that because of necessary police and service system responses, there could be a protection order, he's no longer seeing his children. He might have been removed from the family home by police because he's not safe to stay there. He may feel that he no longer has that identity as a father. He may be part of a cultural community where his harmful behaviour starts to become visible within that community and he loses his status as a leader in that cultural community. He may have blowbacks on his work, etc., etc., etc. One of the things that we listen out for when we're worried about risk is how much does he experience a sense of loss that comes with that identity loss. Violent and controlling behaviours, some men can continue to use that for years and decades and they experience no identity loss. They've got privilege levers, they've got abilities to continue to punish their partner or former partner and not experience loss. But others, of course, there are consequences to their behaviour. And eventually those consequences build, whether it be because of his partner leaving, systems responses, loss of status in his community. we worry when those men feel a really deep sense of being done to, that something's been stripped away from him, that he feels that he can't get back and he really blames her. And we often see post-separation or when men start to experience a form of identity loss, that they increase their controlling behaviour to try to get back what they believe that their partner or former partner has stripped away from him. Now, if that doesn't succeed because she is able somehow to stay safe or to take a risk and continue to be separated from him, she draws a line in the sand, she puts boundaries in place, um, she's supported to be able to put herself first and her children first rather than meet his demands, whatever those demands are, to go to police and say that her disclosures of violence were a lie, to, drop an intervention order, to go to the family court and say that my kid should stay with him. Whatever his demands are, she refuses to do that. Does he get to a point where he develops a grievance and believes that she stripped him of something that he needs to survive? And does he start to develop almost like a self-moral righteousness that he therefore has a right to punish her? It's one of the pathways towards domestic homicide that we're concerned about, is that when he believes and becomes obsessed with something that he thinks his partner or former partner has taken away from him, that he feels is his right to have and that he can't live without it, and he feels a moral righteousness if he can't force her to restore what he thinks has been taken away from him, to severely punish her. Okay. So I've blown through some of the intersects of substance use, AOD, men's use of domestic and family violence. I'll stop now for some questions. I'll stop sharing the screen, and then I will signpost some of the engagement skills and concepts that AOD mental health practitioners can use in trying to have some courageous conversations, sow some seeds with clients who are using violence.
Thank you so much, Rodney. This is extraordinarily well put together. We do have some questions, and guys, if you are thinking about your questions, just please pop them in the Q&A. I'll start with some about how do we help men in becoming aware of their own choices and helping them to make those better choices. So I've got that general question, and then I'll read this one at the same time, which is, I don't have often courageous conversations with my clients with DVSV related orders because they might tell me that the order is wrong or they didn't use violence. And in those situations, is there any advice as to how to get into those conversations in a way, of course, that we're not colluding, but we are having them and then helping people to make better choices?
Yeah, very, very central questions here, and really important to equip ourselves and our colleagues with some skills to reply to these exact types of scenarios. So I'll provide some quick responses, I think, in the second part of this webinar. I'll also signpost and let you know some resources where you'll be able to, even a few little scripts to help you to respond. I guess for the first question, an example is sometimes we're too afraid of colluding and we don't listen. Understandably, we're worried about colluding, and we should be, totally. But because we're worried about colluding, we might not listen at all. And I think some listening is important. If a man says something like that, oh, look, yeah, look, I was drunk. I didn't want to lose it in front of the kids at her, but oh, you know what women are like. She was just right up my face, just giving me all of this shit, telling me I was a no good dad and always drinking. The kids were right there. Oh, it's just horrible. I didn't want to lose, whatever the story is. A little bit of strategic listening might be to try to isolate the feeling that he has. So I might say something like, so it sounds as though you're feeling really worked up at that point. Now, I'm not trying to reflect or paraphrase back his full story about she made him feel like shit and she humiliated him, but I'm trying to find a little bit of a feeling there that he might concur with. And I expect him to then double down. He may then say, oh, yeah, of course I was worked up because she was right here and she was yelling and screaming at me. And I'm just going to let that go. And then I might ask, what did Jennifer and the kids see you say or do at that moment when you were feeling really worked up? So through my questioning, I'm inviting him to talk about, from the perspective of others, what they saw of his behaviour when he had that really strong feeling. The question itself infers that there's a difference between the emotion and the behaviour. And then, as I'll talk about later, there's a range of conversational container skills to try to hold him in a conversation about what happens when he has a really intense feeling, feeling jealous, feeling worked up, feeling angry. I'm trying not to buy into his story that she's causing that feeling, but I'm trying to gently direct him into a conversation around what choices does he want to make when he's having that strong feeling, why that matters. And it might be along the way, I'll ask him, how, in those moments, what would you like to model to your children about how to respond when they're feeling really big? Why might that matter? So I'm trying to focus on motivation. I'm trying to focus on what he might want to move towards. So you're saying, John, that you worked up an 8 or 9 out of 10. There was a lot going on for you. If you were to say to your kids, this is how I want you to be able to handle moments when you're feeling really angry, what would that look like in that moment? What would they see you say or do so that your kids learned something that you would want to model to them? Now, you may not say it in that language, it might be too middle class, too convoluted, but I think you might get the general idea around that. I think when we are afraid to open up a conversation because we know there's that victim stance, and underneath we know he's going to deny and say the intervention order is a whole lot of crap and everything like that. Again, there's a bit of listening there. I might say something like, hey, it sounds as though you didn't really want the police to be involved. It sounds as though that there are some things that you don't agree with around what the police or court said about your behaviour. So I might do a bit of listening there. And then I might invite him. I might go, I wonder, John, if I can be really honest with you. You've got, a lot of disagreements here. My guess is, though, that there is something about how you're responding to things at home that might not be working for you and your family. I'm wondering if, yeah, your angst, your bitterness, of a crisis that's happening now because police and courts are involved, and yeah, it's really turned your life around a lot, and you weren't wanting that to happen. I'm wondering if all of that angst might be getting in the way of you being able to learn something from this situation. I wonder if that could be possible. So I'm not trying to battle against his story. I don't want to collude with it. I don't want to say, oh yeah, it sounds like police got it completely wrong and they never listen to men and they only listen to women. I don't want to feed any of that. But I want to listen a bit. This is not what he wanted, it's not what he expected. It's churning him up. And even if I'm including a little bit, I want to do that because then if I listen to him a little bit, he might then go with me as I try to turn the conversation then towards something that he might learn, something that he might be able to look back on and realize that he didn't do that well. But if I don't listen to him at all, how can I expect him to listen to me?
That's yeah, amazingly helpful. And as you said, we'll maybe revisit that a little bit after. Please let me know if you want to carry on, Rodney, or I'll ask some of the other questions that are here. So
Yeah, I might actually go back to some of the skills now
yeah,
and then come back probably in about 25 minutes or so
absolutely.
for questions. No, thank you, Sally.
Thank
Okay,
you, Rodney.
I'll come back to sharing. So now let's get into some of the skills and roles, and I'll be flying through a number of things here and really pointing you to some resources where you can focus on some things in more detail. Firstly, our role. This is, I've just extended upon a little model that came out of Sweden, actually. So I don't vibe with all of the words. When we're engaging and inviting men in a change process, I don't necessarily call that treatment. But it's a real journey for men because sometimes a single behaviour change program is not enough. And the effectiveness of behaviour change programs varies so much on a case-by-case basis. And I'll talk a little bit more about that just in a moment. But often for AOD, mental health practitioners, They're really important things we can do early on to support in a journey. It's identifying men who use violence, planting some motivational seeds, using your motivational interviewing skills, supporting steps towards change. And then if he does go and start some change work in a men's behaviour change program, and we're still working with our client, we can try to support that program. We can talk with a program provider about what approach are they using to work with a man? How can we support that in our concurrent AOD and mental health treatment? You know, for many men's behaviour change programs, to know when a man does have complex needs, to know that they can work with other services to help address those complex needs in ways that provide similar messages is just absolute gold. So there's real opportunities to contribute here. I think also as part of your role, always listening out for risk. And I've just really briefly down in the bottom focused on a few of the key things to listen out for, and I've got some slides later on that expand upon that in a little bit more depth. And there might be some safety planning. And as I'll just briefly touch upon later, many of you are used to doing safety planning, whether it be managing suicidal ideation and helping a man to ride through some of those peaks of suicidal thoughts, whether it be downstream management of urges to drink, whether it be upstream safety planning strategies to try not to get closer to a situation in which they know there's going to be a lot of social cues around them that's going to encourage them to drink, whether it be developing new connections that's going to support that new him that is not substance dependent. Et cetera, et cetera. You do safety planning all the time. So there are ways of stretching this in focusing on domestic and family violence behaviours. And of course, many of your clients in your work are not going to say, yes, I'm a domestic and family violence abuser. It's often not as direct as that. It might be along the lines of, so John, can you tell me about some times where maybe when you're alcohol impacted, that you're not proud of some things that you do? One of the key things when we're trying to take steps towards a courageous conversation is we're trying to draw a bridge, trying to explain to the client why it's in his best interest that we start talking a bit about his family and his relationships. And of course, it's fundamental principles of many practices in substance use and mental health treatment to do a psychosocial assessment, to focus on context. Relationships matter. Relationships are critical to someone developing a different relationship with a substance. Relationships are critical for someone trying to work through mental health issues. So we can explain that to our client, and we can talk about that it's normal in our assessment work to talk about relationships, family situations, and how our clients manage really difficult feelings, manage conflicts, manage time when they have disagreements, manage times when there are big emotions happening at home. And then from there, we can funnel down, and there is a resource on funneling, which I'll talk about later, how if we just explain it's really normal to talk about relationships and conflicts, and families, and how managing big feelings, that we can then funnel down towards, are there times where he doesn't make great choices with some of those big feelings? And are there times where he might cross the line into creating fear? Are there times where he might cross the line into making demands of family members? So it's really important for ourselves to be really clear how we take those first few steps, how we can just explain it really naturally that it's in our client's best interests to talk about relationships, conflict, how he manages big feelings. And that's really critical for our AOD or mental health work that we're doing. It's not only important, of course, so that we're trying to create safety for family members, is that it's a part of a psychosocial assessment to look at those relationships and how he's managing big feelings as a result of that. Now, just really quickly, when we are able to motivate a client to do some change work on his behaviour, we are looking at behaviour change programs as the referral option of choice. Doesn't mean they're necessarily the only options, but it's not just a simple anger management program. Anger management programs often don't think about risk. they can so easily be conned by men. Change work is hard. We talked about that victim stance before and how a man gives himself the green light to use violence. There's a lot of self-deception involved. And so he's going to deceive others as well. He's deceiving his partner. He's trying to make her believe that she's responsible. He might be trying to convey to the kids that their mum is learning. He's putting a lot of effort into impression management here. Anger management programs often don't pick that up. They also don't offer parallel support to those who are experiencing his violence. Whereas men's behaviour change programs do outreach to his partner or recent former partner. And that's really important because that way those programs can assess risk, can respond to risk, and can also determine whether the program's doing harm, whether he's coming home to his partner or just lying about what the facilitators are saying. So men's behaviour change programs are the referral of choice, and No to Violence, for example, has a registry of what programs are available across Australia. If you need to refer to a private psychologist, do your homework. I look back at some work that I did with men who use violence back 25 years ago with horror. It was before I got into the field. I colluded. I didn't know what I was doing. I undoubtedly caused harm. And we don't want to refer to relationship counselling or family therapy because he'll use that as an opportunity to blame her. Relationship counsellors need to find ways that everybody can do something different, that everybody can take some responsibility for conflict. When we're focusing on adults' use of domestic and family and sexual violence, there's not conflict. It's about him using tactics of power and fear and terror, belittling, degrading, humiliating his partner to be able to get what he wants, such as to control the family environment, to maintain his substance use. That's not conflict. We don't want those who are experiencing his violence to feel that they're responsible for his behaviour, because that allows him to keep blaming her and to keep that victim stance alive. So relationship counselling is not safe. And for victim survivors, it means that they face an impossible choice. Do they speak up about his harmful behaviour in front of him and the relationship counsellor? If so, that's really risky because how might he retaliate afterwards? He doesn't want his behaviour to come out in public. And because of that, they're often going to minimise, not disclose. And they have to silence themselves in order to stay safe. And that is just so oppressive when they're used to being silenced by him. So the behaviour change journey is long. A man completes a program. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's changed. Outcomes vary significantly. And so if you are able to refer and support a man to go to a program in really positive invitational language about what a program can help him to move towards, to be the best father that he can be. It's not just about confronting him around his harmful behaviour. It's as much about what he wants to move towards. And even though, yes, these programs don't, mince words, we want to work with men about their harmful behaviour, and we want men to sit in the discomfort of looking back at some of their harmful behaviour. It's an opportunity to go forward, to do great things for their kids, to build their next relationship if they've lost this past one that's more trustworthy. So, you're all used to finding gentle, compassionate, values-based language to help men about what they really want for their lives, what they want to move towards. And when you're talking with men about programs, you can talk about it as an opportunity. Of course, you can't hide from the fact they will be hard, it'll be really hard work. And your ability to support men so they have the capacity to do this work can be really great. Okay. Just briefly before we get into some skills, you all are aware of the stages of change model. And I think it's just one thing to be careful when we're focusing on clients and where they might be at and in their willingness to take some responsibility for their behaviour. We know that family, domestic and sexual violence is not just about incidents of violence. There's patterns of behaviours. And for some men, there are a range of different behaviours that they use to control family members. Just really want to get the point across that A man might be in a contemplation stage, or maybe even an action stage with respect to some aspects of his harmful behaviour, but be deeply pre-contemplative with respect to other aspects at the same time. It's just really important to take that into account and to remember that. And it can be difficult for us to really determine, is he just performing talk? Is he just telling us what we want to hear? Or are there some genuine seeds there of some motivation to change and some movement to change? And I'll touch upon this in about 10 minutes or so. So, often when we're wanting to engage a client about his harmful behaviour, he wants to tell the story of, I've been hard done by, the feminist magistrates never listened to men, police didn't care about my side of the story. Now I'm removed from my home and can't see my kids, and it's totally unfair. Yep. That's the story that he wants to say. And when we come to think about it, if we're in a conflict, we're in an argument with a best friend or something like that, and we feel they've treated us unfairly, and we go to a friend, we're going to want to say that narrative. We may not be very open to other parts of the story. So we expect him to be in victim stance. What we're trying to do is use skills to just try to move him a bit away from that victim stance, to try to start some other aspects of the story that he's not thinking about. So I'm going to now signpost a range of resources that can help you with a number of skills here. All of these resources can be downloaded from this particular URL on the screen. There is some complexity to some of this. And so I'm not going to be able to unpack a lot here, but hopefully by signposting, spending about 10 minutes or so talking about these particular resources, it'll help you to know, yep, that's the one I need to read. Oh, yep, I need to read these two to help to prepare myself for my next engagement with a client. Okay, firstly, one of the resources is really quite long. Many of them are short. 5 pages, 10 pages, 15 pages or so. This one is very long. And it includes some early resources helping us to identify those clients who we're really worried about in terms of using severe violence, domestic homicide, etc. There's some resources here about engaging men as fathers, because this is a toolkit which was developed, it's a draft toolkit, but it's available for services that are engaging dads. But there's still some useful information even when you're working with men where they're not a parent. Tool 5, for example, has about 40 or 50 pages of guidance on safety planning. And not just for specialist men's behaviour change program practitioners. It was written predominantly for AOD, mental health practitioners, housing and homelessness practitioners, intensive family support, child protection, those responders who aren't DFV specialists, but who are able to extend their existing safety planning work to start to focus on those aspects of his harmful behaviour that he's willing to talk about. And that's not just his harmful behaviour in the past that he's willing to talk about. It might be behaviours that he wants to move towards. So if we think of positive and negative, in my experience, men are willing to talk about a wider range of positive behaviours they want to move towards in building safety or being good dads or building a respectful relationship. They'll go further in talking about what that looks like in the positive than they will disclosing their harmful behaviours when they've done the direct opposite. So sometimes in safety planning, we start off with a positive and then we springboard. So, John, you're telling me that you want to be able to model to your kids to stay calm in situations where you're really stressed. And then I worked with John to unpack what that looks like and how he'd put that into action and why that matters to his kids, why that matters to him. And then I might springboard. Can we talk about sometimes, John, when you haven't modeled calmness to your children? Because I see that this is really important for you. And you're using all of your motivational interviewing skills. You're using your scaling skills. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how important is it, John, for your kids to learn to be calm from you? And he might say 7 out of 10. And of course, as you know, you'll just respond with, wow, a 7 out of 10, not a 4 out of 10. Could you tell me why that's so important to model that to your children? So you have these skills. You don't need me to teach you them. It's about applying them in ways that focus on those behaviours he wants to move towards to build safety for his partner, family, and kids. And then talking about, so John, it's 7 out of 10 is really important for you and for your kids. I don't want to beat around the bush here. My guess is there are some times where you're not calm around your children and you're modeling something different. Because this is so important for you, can we spend some time what it looks like when you're not calm around your family members? So I'm not using the term domestic and family violence. John's not ready to talk about that yet, but I'm still trying to find some behaviours that he wants to move towards, wants to move away from, and starting to do some safety planning. So tool 5 provides a lot of detail on how we can do that and stretch our existing safety planning around mental health and AOD issues to extend to some of these harmful behaviours, even if we can't use the language of domestic and family violence, because he's not ready for that yet. And then he'll just cross his arms and go, look, I'm not a wife basher. So we obviously have to go at the pace that we can go. So some other resources here for me to talk about. The one on the left, and again, these are all downloadable from that URL I presented earlier. It's a poem that actually goes into some detail around how trauma and gender intersect with a man who uses violence in terms of his childhood experiences of trauma and how entitlement and that sense to need to be a man then plays out in his choices to use violence in intimate relationships as an adult. It's a very confronting poem. It's really more about conceptual understanding, and it's annotated. So it's a 5-page resource which actually explains how gender and trauma intersect. You saw the pyramid of shame before, so there's a resource there that unpacks those different layers of shame when we're engaging uses of violence. The 3 anchors model is about how we start off having positive conversations with men about children and fathering, the father they want to be, what their children need from them as fathers, what their children would say if we were to ask them what it looked like for him to be the best dad that he can be, what role that his children want him to play in their lives as a dad. You know, these are things that often men don't think about. How we can start off really positive questions about fathering and positive questions about how critical it is for him to support the relationship of his children with the other parent or other parents. Could be a rainbow family might be more than 2 parents, rather than sabotage it. And how for him to be the best father that he really wants to be, supporting the relationship between his kids and his partner or his former partner is a critical part of that. So it focuses on some skills of working towards what he wants to work towards and being a positive, healthy father, and then springboards. What does it look like when he's not that dad? And how to then start to work on supporting him in some of those harmful behaviours. The one on the bottom right is a series of skills around how to try to avoid colluding and confronting. What does it look like to be in the middle? To still listen and to strategically listen, to be compassionate, to treat him as if, to humanize him and that he matters, but not in a way where we're agreeing with those victim stance narratives that he has, that he's the one who's been hard done by. But also not to just confront him too hard, moralize at him, persecute him. Now, there's a lot of skills there, including a whole set of conversational container skills, really micro skills. And this resource gives you little scripts. So, for example, it goes through skills like contracting, recontracting, redirecting, normalizing, signposting. And these aren't terms we use with our clients. This is practitioner speak to help us to remind ourselves of some of these micro skills and give some examples of how to apply them in a midpoint. So he does feel listened to, but we're trying to shape and turn the conversation to something that focuses on some aspects of his behaviour at home with his partner, his kids, that he wants to move towards, that he wants to move away from. They help us to see how far he's willing to go, to unpack those behaviours, to give a bit of detail to them rather than just vague terms. Why those behaviours might matter to him and his kids. So again, it's that motivation. And then some safety planning. We've been able to use our motivational interviewing skills for him to see why these behaviours are important for him to move towards or move away, then that might give us an opportunity to do a bit of safety planning around them. And the top resource just explains that victim stance thinking that I talked about earlier. The resource on the left gives some more examples of how to try to listen non-collusively. It's hard. And the thing about this is that we're going to stuff up. I stuff up all the time. You know, I collude too much or I'm too oppositional. It's a bit of a dance. We can't be too hard on ourselves. We've got opportunities to correct. So if we start off and we feel drawn into colluding because rapport is tenuous, his mental health is not very good, sure, there might be opportunities later on to be able to step back from that collusion. What a midpoint skill looks like really depends on a whole lot of different circumstances. So there's some real examples there around listening. The middle resource is how we start the conversation, because many of our clients are not expecting a conversation about his behaviours to his family members or to his children, to his partner. They're there for depression, anxiety, ice use, alcohol use, etc. So how we explain it to him really matters. We've got to be clear in ourselves, like I mentioned before, how focusing on his relationships and his behavioural choices in his relationships is core business for our work with him in helping him to address anxiety or depression or substance use. If we're confident in ourselves of the links, and if we're confident in ourselves why it's in his best interests that we open up a conversation about these things, we're going to be able to explain it in a way that makes sense. So I won't unpack this now because of time. It's a really brief resource which focuses on some tips to start the conversation and to try to start it safely, because sometimes, of course, we know some things about his behaviour. Where do we know it from? Well, he may not know everything that we know about his behaviour. We may know some things from a police report, and those things from the police report may come from what his partner has disclosed. He doesn't know that she's disclosed those things to police, so we don't want to tip him off about what his partner's disclosed, because then he might go, oh my word, what's she telling everybody? And of course, that can make things very unsafe for her if he engages in tactics to try to close down her disclosing to services. So this and the next resource, how to create safety to be more direct, again, they're very brief resources, but they raise some considerations for how we can try to open up a safe lane here to try to focus on some aspects of his behaviour without causing more harm. There's a resource on I think it's the left of your screen, about men who use their cultural, their ethnocultural identity as a way to justify their use of violence. In our culture, this is what the men do. In our culture, women know, etc. And it's often a patriarchal interpretation or self-serving interpretation of their culture. But it's sensitive. I have white privilege. So if I'm working with a man of colour, I don't just want to impose my white privilege here, because he's already feeling minoritised and he's already experiencing racism. So this is delicate. This gives 20, as you can see, quite brief practice tips to help us in a culturally safe, culturally humble way to not collude with his patriarchal excuses for using violence, but to productive ways to be culturally sensitive. The best ears resource in the middle is another brief resource, which is around how we manage ourselves, how we can empathise a bit with what he's saying, to then try to turn the conversation. It's a simple model that we can remind ourselves and fellow practitioners about not to panic when he's starting to talk about the intervention order being wrong and the police got it wrong, because this is an opportunity if we manage ourselves, manage our own anxiety, don't panic, we can calmly listen to something, reflect something back from his experience, and then turn and shape the conversation using those midpoint skills I've talked about. Just a couple more minutes before we then have questions. We've just got a couple more resources to go through. The one on the right is about shame-sensitive practice. 20 practice considerations, and again, as you can see, it's just all really brief. It's only 5 pages, a paragraph each on different ways that we can take into account shame that the men experience. The resource on the left is for men who are deeply pre-contemplative about anything to do with their harmful behaviour. How might we try to open up a little bit of a lane, plant a bit of a seed, but use a very indirect approach to try to find a few hooks there where he might be willing to talk about some of his harmful behaviour. Stages of change model that I showed to you before, as applied to DFV in the middle. And the one on the right is when we're engaging with clients who seem to be taking some responsibility. How might we look out for when their talk is really just performative? They're wanting to manage impressions. They may be using systems abuse tactics and trying to get us on site to believe they're on a change journey so that they can weaponize their engagement in services. Okay, almost finished. The article on the left is a practice article. Again, you can download this from their website I mentioned before. It's a great article on trauma and violence-informed practice when working with adults who cause harm. The resource on the right that I co-developed with Sonia Parker, a child protection specialist practitioner and trainer from Western Australia, when we're having really difficult conversations with actually anyone who's causing harm, how we can do that in a trauma-informed way. It's a 3-page model. Some resources about risk, what we can listen out for when we're engaging him about risk, because sometimes we're going to get nowhere. He's too defensive, deeply pre-contemplative, and our main role is to listen out for risk and then to talk with our team leader, our manager, going, I'm concerned here, the way that he talked about his partner, the way that he believes that his partner stripped him of something that he believes is his right, or he's just all over the shop. He's really vulnerable. He's got an ABI. I don't think he's making very good decisions because he's not able to think about consequences in his behaviour. He's using substances. He's talking about arguments at home, and he's talking about all of these things that he believes his partner's doing to him. I think this is just a pressure cooker, and there's a lot of risk here. So we can listen out for these things. And already, of course, if you're struggling with mental health issues or is using substances, that's already an evidence-based risk factor. Throw in an ABI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we do when we're concerned? We don't want to carry that risk alone. We want to be able to talk to, a manager, supervisor, a team leader, and then work out, should we be sharing this information using the jurisdictions, domestic and family violence information sharing laws, to be able to see if another service could safely reach out to his family. And from many jurisdictions across Australia, we are able to safely share information that we've got from the user of violence without the user of violence knowing and without the consent of the user of violence. Often, information sharing laws in different jurisdictions in Australia enable us to share information more widely, enable us to share information that's gained from the user of violence without the user of violence knowing or with their consent. Often with victim survivors, of course, when we're getting sensitive information about victim survivors. If risk is very serious, we don't need their consent, but if risk is not serious, obviously, we do need their consent if it's not serious risk. But for users of violence, we don't need to work out how serious is the risk. We often can share information and be supported to do so by our information sharing schemes. Okay, I'll close now a little bit on case noting and a technical funneling that I talked about earlier as well too, how we can start off focusing on conflicts, relationships, and from there start to funnel down towards behaviours of harm. I'll stop sharing now, and we've got about 8 or 9 minutes for some 10 minutes for some final questions.
Thank you so much, Rodney. And what you're not seeing is everybody thanking you for your approach and all of the work and this presentation. So thank you so much. We do have lots of questions, so I'm going to get straight in them. And everyone who's asked a question, please know we're not going to get to them all, but we will definitely be sharing the recording and all of the amazing resources Rodney is giving us. So hopefully that will go some way to answering the questions. But I just want to ask a quick one about the behavior and then move into really what we can do a little bit more as the workforce. So first, the ones about the behavior. We've had a few people asking about, is the behavior always intention? And then I'm going to put this one in that bracket. How the difference between emotional dysregulation and purposeful intention to harm, and I guess that very difficult line.
No, great question. Really great question, Sally. And it's a continuum. There's almost always a choice aspect involved. And I say that almost always because, again, as focusing before, it can be really intense cognitive impairments, etc., and more reactivity. So I understand that there are some situations maybe where there's less of a choice. The thing is, though, is that if somebody is using violent behavior or controlling behavior, there is an intent there. There is now, he may not be thinking about that intent in his mind because he's just done it so often. So calling her a bad name, there's intent there. There's intent there to make her feel bad about herself. There's an intent there to shut her up. There's an intent there to avoid having a conversation he doesn't want to have. But he's not always recycling in his mind, oh, if I shout at her, if I call her this, she's therefore going to be too afraid to raise this issue I don't want to hear any more from her about. And that's because he's engaged in that behaviour over and over and over again. It's just so automatic. So I think there is always intent there, but sometimes there's not a consciousness of that intent at the choice to use violence. Sometimes that intent is just so quick, so rapid, and is so layered from previous choices that that consciousness isn't necessarily there. But the intent is on a continuum, so that we know, for example, that men who use violence and they're getting visceral signs from her about the impacts and they continue to go to the next step, whether it be physical violence or another form of violence, then they are intentionally pushing through, and there's a degree of dehumanizing of her and there's a degree of righteousness. So it's a complex question. Absolutely. I think there is always intent there, but he's not necessarily conscious of that intent because he's played out that behavior of similar behavior, or it works. Often when we're doing something to try to, that works, we don't pick up our tool and go, oh, if I use this tool, it's going to unlock this. We've learned that from the past. We just take it for granted. So there's still intent, but we don't necessarily think of it at the time because, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And now I'm going to ask this one, which is from the victim survivor point of view, or working with victim survivors. What is, in the words of the question, or the best way to show the victim survivor that mental health or substance use can be used as that accelerator, as you described, and to remind them that the behavior is a choice? Because she's saying that often they've seen when they're working with victim survivors that they may feel sorry for the perpetrator, the person using violence, and therefore feel unable to leave because of that added complexity of them struggling with the substance use or the mental health.
Yeah, so I think it's inviting her, him, or they into a space of at least starting to acknowledge the unfairness of the situation for them. It's not, I don't think it's about educating. I don't think survivors need to be educated. They know so much about his behaviour and about violence. And that's why practitioners with lived experience are some of the best practitioners out there. I think it's more about, so on the one hand, you're telling me, Jane, that, yeah, he's been struggling with depression, struggling for substances. You've seen him go through ups and downs, attempts to recover, and you really want to help him, support him. On the other hand, yeah, you're starting to talk about some of the impacts of his behavior on you and the kids. And I guess I'm wondering, Jane, yeah, it must be hard to know where to draw the line here or how much to keep giving. And is that a struggle for you to know how to? So it's not about educating or telling her. It's more about trying to invite her into a space where she's got the right to think about impacts on her and the kids. She's got the right to start to think about how much do I continue. And further, I think it is useful to sometimes talk about. I wonder, Jane, whether there are some things that he might do that's trying to make you feel responsible. Thinking that for some men who use violence, who are struggling with AOD and mental health issues, that they do have a poor me aspect to them and try to hook their partner in to continue to mother and to care for him. So we can invite her to reflect on whether he is engaging in particular behaviours or things that's making it difficult for her to make that choice. How much should I be caring for him? What about my own life and my kids' life? I really love him. I want his behaviour to change. His behaviour's not changing. How much more chance do I give him, giving all of the impacts? Are there some things that John is doing, Jane, that makes it hard for you to come to this decision? Are you feeling at all that he's reeling you in to continue to want to care for him in ways that makes it hard for you to know what's best for you and the kids?
Thank you. Thank you. There's so many great questions here, but I'd love to ask this one because someone's put it very well and succinctly in this sentence. How do we sit in, well, it says, how do you sit in your discomfort with a perpetrator of domestic violence? So I guess as us workers, how do we sit in that difficult, uncomfortable place?
Poor question. Absolutely. Half the trick of this work is managing ourselves. When there are some men I've just wanted to wring their necks, and there are others I've been reeled in myself and lost. And I've been so touched by the part of themselves that wants to change, I completely forget about all the harm they're continuing to do. And I'm losing sight of her. So there is self-management involved, and that involves supporting each other within teams. What are those situations where I'm more likely to drift towards either colluding or wanting to be too persecutory and oppositional? So one is identifying, one is noticing what are those types of men or types of situations or narratives from men that lead me to go one way or the other. So it's part of self-knowledge. And then how do I keep myself centered and balanced? And how do we support each other, particularly when this is a gendered issue for women practitioners who may be used to, in their own personal lives and in a patriarchal world, having to do so much emotional labor work already? You know, having to work out, oh, I've got to keep smiling. I've got to let that go. And so there's already an emotional labor burden there. And then there's a user of violence where, oh, I feel so manipulated by him, but I have to stroke his ego a little bit in order to build rapport. That feels yuck. It's an extra added burden than it might be on a male practitioner. So how do we support each other in that, where we have an opportunity to be vulnerable with each other, and so we can share with each other those difficult moments? And then what are our little, I guess, emotional regulation strategies ourselves to ground ourselves when we're feeling charmed by a user of violence, for example? How do we ground ourselves to respond to that charm? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rodney, not only for such a fantastic webinar, but as Sally mentioned, there are so many comments in the chat that you wouldn't have necessarily had the opportunity to see, but we will pass them on to you from people thanking you for such a valuable presentation and such thoughtful and just wise feedback and expertise that you've given us. I think that as well as some of the tips on having courageous conversations, I think that you work in such a courageous area as well, and really grateful for what you've given us today. Just in wrapping up, I wanted to let you all know that you can find out more information about the guidelines which this webinar series is linked to and other resources at our website on screen. And also mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, that for all of you who are practitioners, our online community of practice for professionals in Australia who work with people experiencing co-occurring AOD use and mental health conditions is available. And Rodney and Sophie will be joining us for a panel discussion on the 16th of September. And hopefully continuing some of this conversation. You can find out more about that at our website on screen, and I think Hayley will put that in the chat as well. And I wanted to thank you all again for having joined us for this webinar, and thank you again, Rodney. If you would like to watch this webinar again or part 1 again, or share that with your colleagues, you can do that at our website. You can also check out our library of past webinars. We will be back for more as part of this series. We don't have a date for our next one yet, but we are working on a collaboration with the Aboriginal Corporation Drug and Alcohol Network, or ACDAN. We're hoping to have something special and a bit different from what we've done in the past for that next one before too long. You can subscribe to our mailing list or check out our website for updates or details about the next one. We will post updates and we're hoping for something around November at this point. But until then, I wanted to thank everybody for joining us today, and thank you again, Rodney, so much. And please enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.